for joining me for Knitting 101. My name is Kristen and I am a knitting pattern designer. Yes, that is a real thing. So what that means is that I create hand knit garments or accessories like this or that or that. And then I write down a pattern so that other people who knit can create the same thing. Most of the content here on my YouTube channel is geared toward people who already knit and are looking to learn new techniques. But in light of the fact that we are all being good citizens and practicing social distance, and maybe are at home with kids who are out of school for the next few weeks, I decided to create a short series of videos to actually teach you how to knit. So whether you are working from home or are at home with kids who are out of school, being driven insane by a spouse who is working from home, or just bored out of your mind in self-isolation already and are looking for a new hobby, something to keep you busy, the upcoming series of short tutorials is going to give you the basic skills that you need to get started with knitting. So this first video, I'm going to go over all of the materials that you need to get started. Okay, before I get into the specifics of what you'll need, I want to talk a little bit about where to go about getting these things. Good news is that you can order everything that you need online if necessary. You can certainly buy these kinds of things on Amazon. You can also go to a yarn and knitting specific online retailer. To that end, I would suggest Knit Picks, which has materials in a variety of different price points. You can get any of these things at a big box craft and hobby supply store like Joann's, Michael's, Hobby Lobby, any of those. And you can also get materials at your local yarn store. This would be an independent shop that focuses primarily on knitting supplies and yarn. Generally speaking, for knitting, I want to recommend that you get the best quality products that you can afford. However, since you're just trying out a new hobby, you're not sure if it's going to stick. So this first time, maybe you want to skimp a little bit and get some cheaper supplies. You can always upgrade later. So to that end, your local yarn shop, because it caters more to people who already knit, may not have all of the basic supplies you need at a price point that makes sense for you. They may have some more expensive stuff. You can always check them out, and I do encourage you to support your local businesses, local independent businesses, but in this case, that might not be the way to go, just to get these basic materials for your first try. If you prefer to shop online, then again, I'm going to recommend that you go to a yarn-specific retailer like Knit Picks, as opposed to Amazon, just because you're going to have more variety, better quality materials in a variety of price points, and have a better idea of what it is that you're getting than you might on Amazon, where it's, I think we can all agree, very easy to accidentally order the wrong thing. And if you want to shop at your local big box craft supply shop, you will certainly find these materials there. And that is definitely a place where you're probably going to save the most money. Regardless, you have a lot of options and you don't have to leave your house if you don't want to. So no excuse for not being able to get these materials. They are readily available. All right, so now let's get into what exactly it is you need to get started with knitting. Knitting needles, those are going to be important. You want to get a set of knitting needles in a size US 8 or 7. If you happen to be in the UK or elsewhere and not in the US, knitting needles are sized by millimeters. So that's going to be a 4.5 millimeter or 5 millimeter set of needles. You do need 2 of them. This is knitting, not crochet. This is an old pair that I got probably at Michael's craft store. And if anybody in my family is watching and wants these, you're welcome to come get them, keeping in mind social distancing. So size 7 or 8 knitting needles. These are straight needles. If what your store happens to have is circular needles, you can also use those. You don't necessarily need them. You can knit pretty much anything on circular needles. With straight needles like these, you can only knit things that are flat and will later be sewn together. So if you think you are going to stick with knitting and you have to make a choice, I would definitely go with a circular needle instead of a straight needle. But again, if you're just getting started and want to try it out, a cheap set of straight needles is perfectly fine, US 7 or 8 size. The next thing you need is yarn. Unless you are allergic to it, I highly recommend that you buy wool yarn as opposed to an acrylic yarn. Acrylic yarn is simply not as flexible as wool. It's not as useful as wool, in my opinion. Also, just because wool sometimes is itchy, that doesn't mean you're actually allergic to it. There are some wools that are more itchy than others, and you can do a little bit of research about that if you like. But a wool yarn, generally speaking, unless you're allergic, should be your preference. And what you want is a worsted weight yarn. This is a skein of yarn from the online retailer I previously mentioned, Knit Picks. And the way you will know it is worsted weight, it says worsted weight. If it does not say worsted weight or anything of the sort regarding the weight, you want to look for the number in the ball of yarn. In this case, that's a 4. So you want a skein or a ball or a hank, they come by different names, of worsted weight yarn. This is a heavier yarn that's going to match well with these size needles that I've recommended. And when you're just getting started, you want to use a yarn and needles that are a little bit heftier. So a worsted weight yarn, 1 ball skein hank is sufficient just to get started learning. And then the last thing that you're going to need specifically is a yarn needle. This is basically a sewing needle that's really big. You can see that the hole at the top is much larger than for a sewing needle because you're going to put yarn through it instead of thread. Again, you can find this at any of the places that have the yarn and the knitting needles, but you do want to have one of these. A sewing needle is not going to work. It is much too small, so a yarn needle. Other than that, a notebook maybe to write things down, and a pair of scissors to cut your yarn. I'm pretty sure you already have that somewhere in your house. All right, so those are the basic materials you are going to need for these next few lessons to learn how to knit. So go ahead and place your order online, hop over to your craft shop and grab what you need. In a couple of days, I'm going to go ahead and post the first lesson where you're going to learn how to start your knitting project. See you then.